Joining us right now, KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst, host of FoxNews.com's DEF CON Show 3, today at 1 p.m. on live.foxnews.com. KT McFarland, we are now sending military aid and arms and support to the Syrian rebels because of the red line that was drawn about chemical weapons usage by the president. And I'm told, I hear, that this is to ensure that those chemical weapons don't fall into the wrong hands. But do we even know who the wrong hands are? What?
Wait a minute. We are arming the rebels, and we're not even sure who the rebels are, although we have a pretty sneaking suspicion that the great majority of them, the strongest of them, the best organized them, are Al-Qaeda. And we're going to trust those guys to get the chemical weapons and secure them? That is so totally wrong. I don't understand. I mean, we're trusting the fox in the chicken coop, right?
Yeah. And so what? So we should just stay out of it completely, because now, I mean, you've been warning about the chemical weapons problem in this region. We just had a change of leadership over in Iran, and people are calling this guy a moderate. I don't know what it takes to be a moderate in Iran. I mean, what is this? Is a conundrum. What do we do?
Well, I think with regard to Syria, we don't arm the rebels. And my take on it is that Syria's already lost. You know, if we think that by arming the pro-Western, secular, good guy rebels, that's going to make a difference in the final outcome, I think we're wrong. Maybe if we had done so 2 years ago, but at this point, Syria's lost. And the battle is now between basically two groups. It's the chemical weapons-using, population-massacring, evil Assad government versus the rebels. And the rebels are not George Washington at Valley Forge. These rebels are predominantly Al-Qaeda. I was just last week in Israel, and I was on that border where the Syrian rebels are fighting the Syrian government forces. Nobody in Israel thinks that I talk to, journalists, military leaders, political leaders, they don't want to talk about it publicly, but they all feel that the rebels really are the Al-Qaeda affiliates. So at this point, my takeaway is, as long as you got two enemies killing each other, don't try to stop them. Don't try to step in and stop them from killing each other.
Honorable McFarland, this is Alan West.
Hi.
How you doing, ma'am? I couldn't agree with you more, but I want to talk to you from the strategic level. Do we really have a coherent national security strategy? I mean, when you listen to the president talk about Afghanistan and going into peace talks with the Taliban, basically asking them to not be the Taliban, when you look at a president to say we're going to pivot away from the Middle East, well, guess what? That just emboldened the enemies. Egypt is now controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood, the Maghreb, North Africa, radical Islamists. I mean, where do we go from here?
Well, I think that the administration's foreign policy is completely consistent in its inconsistency. And if you look at that entire part of the world, 2.5 years ago, that region, North Africa, Middle East, all the way over to Afghanistan, was relatively secure, at peace. Again, it's not a part of the world that's ever going to be Switzerland, but relatively secure and at peace, and certainly, for the most part, pro-American. Where are we now? With that entire region, North Africa, the Middle East, the Levant, the Persian Gulf, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that entire region is all in political and economic chaos, and it is predominantly anti-American.
So let's talk about Afghanistan.
I think that, by the way, I can't think in my entire 40 years, 50 years of government experience that a leader has ever been able to do a flipperoo that fast.
Yeah, less than 5 years.
So let's focus in on Afghanistan real fast, because the president made a big deal yesterday at the G8 summit saying, yeah, we're going to talk to the Taliban as long as they, promise not to be the Taliban anymore, I guess. And then within 12 hours, overnight, we had a deadly attack murdering 4 American armed service members there, attack carried out by the Taliban. And now Karzai's government is angry at the statement, and they're pulling out of the security discussions with the United States because of this move toward the Taliban. Have they just completely screwed up the peace in Afghanistan, such as it is?
Well, I don't think it was ever there. I think that in Iraq they did snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. In Afghanistan, I think the surge has been so badly mangled that at this point, of course, Karzai wants out of the talks. He wants to cut his own separate deal with the Taliban.
Yeah.
At this point, we're leaving. He wants to make sure that he can keep his head as the inevitable civil war ensues in Afghanistan the minute we leave, between Northern Alliance, and the Taliban and whatever is left of the Karzai government.
You know, we're talking about the Middle East, but I think a lot of people are not paying attention to what's happening in the Pacific, where the president said we're going to pivot to. You just had the talks with Chinese, the new president Xi Jinping. But think about, you know, the Chinese expansion, going into the Senkaku Islands, Japanese territory, going into the Scarborough Shoals, Philippines, going into incursions into India. The belligerence of North Korea, I think, is backed by China. You know, where are we finding any type of success with our foreign policy? Where, you know, who is really focused on our national security other than, you know, social egalitarianism?
I think that the administration's overall approach to foreign and domestic policy is wrong in both ways. They should use the Chicago-style politics, you know, elbows out, take no prisoners. That's how we should be dealing with our enemies and our adversaries.
Well, their enemy is the Tea Party.
Not on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, their enemy is the Tea Party.
Yeah, but exactly. And then we treat our own, and then domestically, what do? It's the strong arm politics with our domestic their rivals or colleagues, and then it's the Mr. Nice Guy stuff overseas. I think we got it flipped around. We should be much tougher and have the Chicago-style politics abroad. I was in China last month. It was a trip of Nixon administration alumni to retrace 40 years later the steps that Nixon took in the historic visit that he did in 1972. And I was with the vice foreign minister, the foreign minister, cabinet officers, and they look at the pivot to Asia and say, wait a minute, you guys, first you invaded Afghanistan, then you did Iraq, and now you're talking about pivoting to us. They look at that as a very belligerent move. I said, look, it's much more about American domestic politics and the reflection that our economy is really increasingly focused on Asia. I think that the biggest problem we have with China is the cyber issue, and the second biggest problem is we need to talk to each other, not past each other, but we need to talk to each other about what is China up to. We don't want to prevent China's rise. We're happy to have China rise. We just don't want it to be at our expense.
Thank you, KT McFarland. Always great to have you.
Thank
and
you
such
so
a
much.
busy day, too. We could go for another hour. Thanks for joining us.